Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's on some talk show. It doesn't really matter which one, and he's talking about the interventions. It doesn't matter even which one, but he keeps bringing up with the host. He keeps saying, "Oh no, but the consensus," because the host is saying, "Look, there's all of these scientists." He's saying there was 24 scientists that were saying this about the interventions, and no one was listening. You guys just shut them down. You shut all of these people down. You just labeled them, deniers and anti-vax and all these different kind of labels, and yet these people were experts. And he goes, "No," Tyson said, "no. The consensus was this. You can always pick 12 or 24 scientists, out there. You can pick some crazy physicists who believe the Earth is flat, that kind of thing. But that doesn't mean that it's the consensus." Now, this is incredibly embarrassing for anybody to use as an argument, especially if they're a scientist. And it's something that I've never used before in my life, which is potentially one reason why I'm an independent thinker and I've been able to come up with new discoveries. I don't believe in the consensus, and I certainly, when I'm arguing my point, never appeal to the consensus ever. My appeal is to evidence, argument, reason, logic, and so forth, right? Now, because if you did take seriously the idea that if I said, "Hey, here's the consensus," and that had swaying power, well, then if there's 51% consensus in my favor and I can convince you of that, and then it should sway you a little bit. Now, I've just made it 51.1% consensus. And that's now even stronger swaying power for the next person, right? That kind of argument leads to a positive feedback loop. It leads to a cascade towards groupthink. I talked about this before in the context of censorship and government censorship, or any kind of censorship. People that say, "Well, if you should just censor non-consensus views." Well, you do that and you immediately have a positive feedback loop where consensus justifies censorship, censorship justifies pushing those down, which makes a stronger consensus, and so forth and so forth. You end up with groupthink. These arguments that Tyson is putting forward are the arguments that invariably lead to groupthink. But I didn't want to focus so much on that today. What I wanted to focus on is that the other bad part, as if there could be something worse, the other bad part of the folks who appeal to consensus is all they do is appeal to consensus. They don't actually provide arguments that is the consensus. Now, one of the few cases that I've seen where they would actually provide data that there's consensus was in the climate change. And they used to do this in the 2010s or something like this. They would actually go ask all of these people that are in the climate fields and get polls so they could say 90% of climate scientists say that there's global warming, and so therefore we should believe there's global warming. Now, that is one of the most ridiculous things to do. Now, it might not be ridiculous if you're interested in sort of the sociology and philosophy of science and how science changes over time. You might be interested in that kind of data, but you shouldn't be interested in that kind of data to make an argument to somebody else. That's just embarrassing, right? But that wasn't something that Neil deGrasse Tyson has data for in the case of the interventions of any of these kinds. He didn't have data that the consensus for these things was this. Right? Where's the study that showed that the consensus? He didn't appeal to any study. And everybody that you've heard saying this about lockdowns, the consensus. Well, the consensus wasn't. Standard opinion in 2019 was don't lock down, right? But suddenly in March, common sense. Everybody thinks that you should lock down, right? They would just say it. They would just say it's consensus about masks. They would just say it. All of these things. We always forced people to vaccinate when there was a pandemic, and we would, coerce everybody and banish them from society. That's just what everybody thinks. That's the consensus. Now, where's the evidence that is even the consensus at all? Now, of course, there wasn't any evidence, and there's a pretty good reason why they might think it's consensus, even if it's not. And it's fairly obvious if they just thought about it for a second. They are sitting in a groupthink in the first place. All of the people in their groupthink think these things. All the experts that they hear from think these things. It is the consensus in the network in which they're bathing every day. Right? Now, we're anti-lockdowners are anti-mainstream right? Anti-mainstream media, anti-mainstream narrative. Every article that we see in the New York Times and CNN and BBC was saying stuff against us. So we're not under no illusions that all the experts on our side. We're hearing from experts all that we're bathing in all of our network. We have tons and tons of experts that agree with us. But we're under no illusions that that's the total consensus across both populations, both the lockdowners and the anti-lockdowners. We're under no such illusion, right? But there's a pretty good reason that you, Neil deGrasse Tyson, might think that there's consensus across the entire population, even though there's not. It's because you sit in a groupthink, right? You sit in a groupthink. You sit in a network where everybody agrees with you. That's what determines the group that you're in. You're in a group that all agrees with each other. So of course you believe there's consensus, but you provided no argument that there is. You're biased to believe that there is consensus, even if there's not. And even if there was consensus, for a scientist to be suggesting this out loud as an argument for other people to listen to, you ought to be embarrassed. And that was your science moment. Wanted to point out one of the books that you may not know about. It's my third or fourth book. It is called Human 3.0. One of the kinds of things that I've studied is how it is that we became the humans 2.0 that we are today. Right? We're not like our great ape ancestors. We have language, we have music, and we didn't evolve these things. And writing, we didn't evolve these things. Culture evolved them to fit us, to harness us, which is an earlier book, Harnessed, and Vision Revolution. I talk about this kind of thing as well in one part of it. But on that, once you get how we went from human 1.0, our primate selves, to human 2.0s today, it shows you the path for what human 3.0s will be, what we are in the midst of becoming over time. And it's a completely different philosophical way of thinking about the future of humankind than the standard thought. Right? Standard sci-fi futuristic things completely have it on its head, and they don't know how to think about how we got here, and so they have no idea how to think about the future of humankind. Get yourself a copy of Human 3.0, which is only available at my website, changizi.com. It is a novel. It's half novel and then half a whole bunch of essays on these topics. I felt that the only way to really describe the kinds of principles that are going to guide us or take us to the future really required a novel to flesh that out. And that was your science moment.